So, we are in our last 2 weeks of our series. We're wrapping up our series on emotionally healthy spirituality. Last 2 weeks, this week and next week, and then we're done. And today's title is called Developing a Rule of Life. You'll see in quotes, I'll explain more of what that means. So, today and next week, we're really ending with what are the most practical applications. Like from everything we learned since August, what is the greatest takeaway I can have in my life? And today we're asking the question of what is the point of living as a disciple of Jesus? Like back in the day, kind of sort of everyone in America across the board was like at least nominally Christian or like went to church at least once in their life. So being a Christian was kind of normal. But nowadays it's not the case. And so what does it mean for us to be Christians, to be followers of Jesus? And that's the question that we want to ask ourselves today. Because the more you know the answer to that, the more you can stand strong in the midst of what comes. Because how you answer that question determines how you live today and this week, the rest of this year, next year, and the years to come. So let me ask you this important question. You're going to see this slide a couple times today. But this is the question. Why do I live for Jesus? Asking yourself, why do I live for Jesus? Okay, like in your head, ask yourself right now, why do I live for Jesus? Most of us have something important in our lives. Okay, so like maybe what's really important to you is your job or making a lot of money. That's not a bad thing. But you have to ask yourself, why do I want that? Why is it important to me that I make money? Maybe it's because you want to have the life that your parents never could give you. Or maybe it's nobody ever thought you could be successful, and so this is your way of proving to the world that you're successful. Or there's lots of reasons, right? None of that is wrong, but it's important to know why we do what we do. Even things that are good and happy that we want to do, like finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend or someone to marry. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And yet, why do we want it, right? Asking yourself why. If your why is, I want a boyfriend or a girlfriend to satisfy every one of my longings and to hear everything and know me and accept me fully as I am, that's great. But is that going to happen? No, not all the time, because no human being can love you and think that you're amazing all the time, right? So your why actually is really important because it sets expectations that often sometimes are not realistic. Why do you want to finish nursing school so young? What's the point, right? Like you work so hard to get in, you work so hard to finish. What's your why? Towards the end, you get kind of burned out, right? Like I am graduating this semester, woo! But at the very end of school, you get burned out, right? You don't want to do anything. You're like, why am I in college? What's the point? You have to know your why. Why did you do this? Or you change jobs, or you move, or you do this, or you do that. You have to ask yourself, why did I do this? What was so important about this to me? For us, we wanted to grow our family for a long, long time. And I finally had to realize, ask myself, why is it so important to me that we have more than one kid? Because one kid is fine, right? Why is it so important to me? And I realized that one of the reasons for me was that, so I have a brother, y'all know that, right? And there's only 2 of us in our family. And my parents only wanted 2. Well, my mom only wanted 2. And so we only had 2. But I grew up always wanting to have more siblings. I wanted to have a big family, have more fun, more siblings. And so I realized that was part of the reason for me, why I really wanted to give that to my kid. And it's not a bad reason, but I had to realize, why do I want this? Or what's the point of this? Why is this so important to me? We have to know our why. Because the more aware you are of your why do you have your why? Then the more you can realize, wait, is this a healthy why? Is this a realistic why? Is this why line up with what God's plan and life is for me? Remember this golden circle? I talk about it all the time. Okay. I love the golden circle. Simon Sinek, TED Talk, okay? So it's the idea of your why drives everything you do. Everything. And most of us have an unconscious why. All of us have an unconscious why. Even if small things like, why is it so important to us to have this kind of pair of shoes or this kind of car or this kind of food or whatever it may be, it's even those small decisions, there is a why behind it. Not always bad, but you have to know your why. Because the why drives your life. The why will drive your life. No matter what your why is, it will always drive your life. And so you have to ask yourself, is my why worth it? Is my why worth all of my life? If I were literally on my deathbed tomorrow, would my why have mattered? Will it have mattered? Will it have mattered? Like Simon, soon you're going to take your CPA test, right? Coming up. And that's good. That's important. But you have to know why. Why am I working so hard to do this? Because if you don't know your why, it's so easy to get discouraged. It's so easy to lose heart. It's so easy to get distracted, right? And use all the good things for other things, maybe that aren't like glorifying to God. All of us can do that. All of us in our lives. Why do you do what you do? You all have an unconscious why. We all do. And that's the question we want to ask ourselves today. Because in our world today, it is very easy to get distracted. I think no one can ever be bored anymore. Like 90s kids, we grew up being bored, okay? Like if you're bored, your parents are like, go outside, do something, okay? But nowadays, we literally don't get bored. Because if we're bored, we always have something in the palm of our hand to distract us, always. You guys know who has an iPhone? iPhone in the house? Okay. So did you guys do the new iOS 15 update, software update? Okay. So like we did it, and like it has the new like focus feature. Did you guys notice that? Okay. So like it used to be called just do not disturb. So like I would turn it on at night when I go to bed so like I don't get notifications. But now there's like a focus feature, so you can have like when you're working, when you're sleeping, when you're, I don't know, it's like random stuff like that. So you can like notify your circle that you're working, so please don't distract me. I don't know, it's kind of interesting. But the idea is like, it's very hard for us to focus in our world. It's very hard for us to like have purpose and have like a focus. We're very scattered. We're very distracted. Did you guys know, apparently, my husband, because I always multitask, and he always tells me, you're not actually getting more done. And I'm like, no, I am. Look at it. And so he like looked up all this research about multitasking, and it's actually not that good for you. Like you actually don't do any of your work really, really well. You just do all your work kind of mediocre. But anyway, the point is, it's very hard for us to like focus in on what's important for us and actually do that, because it's very easy to get distracted nowadays. We get really caught up in our busy lives. And so let me ask you, if you were to answer the question today, what would you say? What is the most important thing you could do with your life? And you only could pick one thing. You can't pick 5 things. If you could only pick one thing, like what's the most important thing in your life, Nayang, that you could do? What's the most important thing? Like how would you answer that? What's the most important thing? In Deuteronomy 6:5, it says this. All the Christians talk about like, what's my purpose in life? Here you go. This is it. This is everyone's calling and purpose in life. Now, how it manifests is different, but here it is. We are called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, and all our strength. This is the greatest commandment across the whole scriptures, old and new. The most important thing you and I are called to do is to love God with every single thing we have, every part of us. That's hard to do, but that's our calling. That's your identity, is to love him with everything you have. Now, how we do that practically in our daily lives with our work or with our families or those things, that all fleshes out differently for each of us. But ultimately, what is your why? I'm doing this because I want to love the Lord with all my heart, with everything he's given me. If Simon is like, I want to do this work and this job because through this, I want to love the Lord. I want to be able to use the skills he's given me to glorify him. I want to use the money I make to do this. I want to do this with that. Like, those are ways that we can practically live out loving God with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our strength, all of our mind. King David talks about it this way in Psalm 27, verse 4. It says this. He's saying this. He's writing this down. The one thing I want to do with my life, The one thing I seek to do is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections. So it's not just I have to love God. For him, it was I want to be with God, because being with God is the greatest thing ever. King David was a freaking king, you guys. He led an entire nation. He was a commander of an army. He was a husband. He was a father to many people. Like, he had so many things going for him. And yet he said, none of those things matter. The one thing I want the most is not to be king. The one thing I want the most is not to have like 15 wives, which he did. The one thing he wants to have the most in his life is to be with God. To be with God and delight in him. Like, that is the level we want to aim towards. Like, King David sets the standard of like, this is where I want to, this is what Christian life really should be like. Like, I know I have to love God, but I want to love him because I want to be with him. It took David decades to get there. It's not an overnight thing. But that's the aim of our lives, is that's the way I want to live. I want to truly be with God. And that's what our why should be about. And so when you see the question again, why do I live for Jesus? Why do I live for Jesus? I hope and pray that one day that could be your answer, is I want to be with God. That's why I want to live for Jesus. Like, I literally have so much joy being with him. Like, God is my everything. If I don't have him, I don't have anything in this life. We're not all there. And sometimes we're there and then we lose that heart because we're human. But that's the goal. That's the desire. I want to be with God. I want to experience like the joy that comes from when I pray and I can know that God's answering my prayer. Like, there's so much joy in that. Like, I want to feel so much gratitude for what God's given me in my life. Like, there's so much joy in that. That's where we want to be. But in our crazy, distracting, hard to focus world, you and I could have a goal of like, yeah, I want to be like King David. I want to love God and I want to be happy loving God. That's great. But if we don't have a plan or a structure or some way to do it in our daily lives, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen. So at the end of the book that we're basing our series off of, it talks about this idea of a rule of life, which is actually a long Christian tradition. But the word rule, R-U-L-E, okay, so let's put it on the screen. The word rule actually is a Greek word, okay? And the Greek word means trellis. Okay, so you guys know what a trellis, let's show the trellis. So the trellis is like, you guys know when like vines grow, or like grapes vines or whatever else, or like tomatoes, you know, they need a structure to help them grow up. Otherwise, where will they grow? They'll grow out, and then we'll step on them and the fruit won't be good anymore, right? So like they have to grow up and out. That's what a trellis is for. So go back to the previous slide. So a rule of life is the idea of, the rule of life is like a structure, a trellis to help us grow in God, okay? Because without a trellis, without a structure, we're just going to podja, okay? We're just going to like grow out and then get stomped on, and it's not very good. So the only way to grow in God is to have some kind of trellis, some kind of structure. And the thing is, very few people actually have a conscious trellis. Like, I have a conscious plan, a conscious way that I'm going to grow in God. Very few people have that. Like, very few people. Most people, it's like, well, I'll go to church and that's it. And that's a good start. But that's not a trellis. That's just like, I don't know, the ground or the soil. Like, to help you grow, but you need some kind of structure in your own life that you create. So Daniel is a really good example. David, Daniel, most famous like names, okay? Daniel is a really good example of someone who had a really well-developed trellis, a really well-developed rule of life. In the beginning of the book of Daniel, we find him as a teenager. But by the time we hit Daniel 6, which is our main passage for today, in Daniel 6, he's a much older man. He has lived for many decades in Babylon. Babylon is like the most anti-God kingdom of all history. All history. Like, Rome came afterwards, all those things, like, doesn't matter. Babylon was the most anti-God kingdom of all history. So in Revelations, when God compares the end times, Jesus compares the end times to Babylon. Like, our world will be like Babylon. It's so anti-God. It's like Babylon. And so he lived in the most anti-God, most distracting, most kill everything about good, about God. Like, that's where he lived. And he didn't just, like, live in the outskirts of Babylon. He was in the middle of government, making decisions and doing things for this kingdom. And I've shared this right before, too, I think. But in Daniel 6, we find his coworkers are super jealous, right? They can't get any dirt on him. So they find out the only thing he does besides his work and be a good person is to pray. And so they use that against him. So they made a law, if you pray, you die. Literally thrown into den of lions. And so in Daniel 6, verse 10, we see Daniel's response. It says this: but when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, so the law not to pray to anybody else, he went home and knelt down as usual, with the windows open, so like nobody could mistake what he's doing. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to the Lord. See, Daniel had been doing this for decades. This was his trellis. This was his structure. This was the way he built his life. Now, I'm not saying everyone has to do 3 times a prayer a day. That's not the point. But the point is, for Daniel, that's what he created. That's the system that worked for him. Of like, I have to pray 3 times a day to God, thanking him for all things. He's in exile. He's lost his family. He's forced to live a life he never chose to live. And yet every day, 3 times a day, he chose to be thankful. And now we see him decades later living out that faithfulness. That even to the point of a death sentence, he's like, cool, that's fine, but like, I'm not going to stop, you know? What gave him the courage and the boldness to live that out? It was many, 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 many days and years of figuring out what his trellis, what is my structure? How am I going to choose to live for God in the middle of this very anti-God world that I live in? So the question is, what can I do? How can I set up my life so that I'm not 50 years old one day, turn around, look, and be like, what kind of life did I live? What was it all for? You know that midlife crisis thing? Like, we don't have to go through that if we choose and are intentional about how we live today. Today, what kind of life am I going to live? What kind of structure, what kind of trellis will I create in my life so that I will grow in God? Not just grow out and get stepped on and get hurt and like get discouraged, but what can I do in my life so that I can grow upwards and outwards in God? There's no one right way to create a trellis. There's no like one right way to like, you have to do this, this, this to grow in God. There's no one right way. There's lots of different ways, but the point is you have to find out what works for you. And that's kind of a trial and error thing. I've had seasons in my life where doing QTs was like really important. Like that really helped me grow. There were other times when I was doing more prayer. And like I was praying specifically for people who needed to be saved. And that really grew my faith because I saw people's lives change because of what I prayed for. There were times when I did the Bible in a year, which we're doing right now with Changyambu. Like that really helped me get a big picture. So every like season, there's different things. I did journaling for a while. Then I had a baby and everything changed. Like, so different seasons of your life, different things will work, and that's okay. The point is to always be asking God, what kind of trellis can I create so that every blessing you want to give me, I can actually grow in God well, not just take it for granted. So again, there's no one right way, but let me provide you with 4 different ideas, okay? So 4 different ideas to come. So the first one is prayer. Prayer is really important. You don't have to do this every single day all the time. Good if you do. But the point is, what can prayer look like? Okay, when I say prayer, what image comes to your mind? Okay, so the prayer hand emojis. When I grew up, as I was growing up, I saw my parents pray all the time. And how they prayed was the old school Korean loud way of prayer. You know what I'm talking about? You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay, like 주여, and like praying super loud and like praying and like that's what I saw. And so that's how I imagined all prayer has to be like that. Or if you've only seen like contemplative prayer, like silent prayer, and that's all you've seen, then maybe that's all you think prayer is to be, you know? Or you've only seen prayer like prayer before meals or whatever else. The point is, prayer is very diverse. There's lots of ways that we can pray. It can be done through scripture. You can like actually, as you read your scripture, you can pray back those words to God. When he says like, when Paul is writing to the Corinthians and he's saying like, I hope and pray that you will grow in your faith, you can pray that like, God, just like them, like I want to grow my faith too. The end. Very easy. Like incorporate into what you're already doing. Or maybe it's solitude, like, kind of being on your own. Maybe it's 5 minutes, lunch break, get away, just like focus in, ask the Lord, like, God, thank you. That's it. But that's what works for you. Or maybe you're going to pray specifically. Maybe some people here, it's hard for you to pray for yourself, but it's really easy to pray for other people. Like, I have that sometimes. I'm like, it's very hard to believe miracles for myself, but it's very easy to believe miracles for somebody else. And so you make a list of people, ask people in your life, hey, what's your prayer request? I have a friend who does that often. She'll text me every couple of months, like, hey, what's your prayer request? She's not just asking me just to be like, oh, that's nice. I know she's actually praying for me. And I know that's how God uses her prayers. Maybe that will help you to like kickstart your prayer life of like, I want to pray for these 3 people in my life, for these 3 very specific things. Because when that gets answered, do you know how much that builds your faith? Do you know how exciting it is? Lots of ways that we can do prayer. So again, if something sticks out to you today, flag it in your brains. Flag it. Like hold it in your mind like, maybe I'll do that this next year. Okay? The next one is rest. This one's really fun. Maybe all of you will be like, yes, I'm going to do this one. This is how I'm going to grow in God, by playing, okay? But like Sabbath, we talked about Sabbath, like an actual day to rest in God. Simplicity, I love this one. Simplicity, like rest is simplicity. So simplicity being like less material things or choosing to tithe or do offerings more. Because when we give to God, back to God, what he's given to us, it's us saying, hey, I'm thankful. Like, this is from you, God. This job, like, yeah, I did the work, but you gave me the skills, the breath to breathe, to be alive. You gave me the opportunities to do this. So, like, I'm going to give this back to you, God. You will be surprised whenever you tithe and do offerings how much more God gives into your life. It's like a farmer, which none of us have done, but if you're a farmer and you're in a famine, what do? Do you eat the seeds? Do you use it to like make bread? No, you plant the seeds. You sow the seeds. You know it's going to take a while for it to come out back, but you plant more because you know that the more you plant, the more food you're going to have in return. We don't eat the seeds and use it all up right now. We plant knowing that we don't have enough right now. That's a way of living a simpler life. Like, I don't need all the Black Friday, Cyber Monday deals. Like, I don't need all those things. I just need to live a simpler life. Maybe it's play. Like, maybe you work so hard that you don't know how to rest. Rest is one way that you can, like, be with God. A third is work. Sounds a little bit different, but work. So serving others. Like, when you find out what you love to do you know how much God delights in that? Do you know how much God delights in it when you find something you love to do? Because he's made you, he's wired you each a unique way so that certain things bring you to life, certain things bring you joy. When you and I find what we're like, find joy in, and we use that to serve and love his body, do you know how much God loves that? Do you know how much that brings us closer to the heart of God? When we use the things that we've been given, the gifts we've been given to care for others, even your job, find what brings you joy, even in the job you have. Even if it's like, you know this job is not forever, it's a stepping stone in your career, it's not the greatest job, you don't love your boss, whatever. But find the joy. Find the one thing that you're like, God, thank you for this job. Thank you for this paycheck. Thank you for this. Whatever it may be, finding joy in what you've been given, that can bring you into a deeper relationship with God. Just by doing that. Most of you guys in this room do 40-hour weeks, right? Work weeks. That's a long time. If you and I have a mentality of like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever, is that going to bring your life joy? Is that going to bring you closer to God? No. But instead, if you're like, hey, this might not be the end of my career or my job, but you know what? I'm going to find something about this that brings me joy. Like, even if it's like nail work, right? Like the joy of like making something beautiful. Like those are things that we can find joy in, that when we find joy in those little things, we can draw closer to God through that. Does that make sense? Instead of us feeling like so down and discouraged about things. Lastly, also caring for your body. That's an important thing. That's a really important thing. When you work out and exercise, do you know what's going on in your body? The hundreds of like chemicals and all these things, hormones being released, God made your body that way. Do you know how you can delight in God through moving your body? Like there's so many ways that we can connect to God in just the every practical little day things of our lives. So let's do that. The last one is relationships. Relationships, emotional health. Some of us, we came from families that made it really hard for us to have healthy emotional lives. And so we have to do extra work to work through that. Maybe it's counseling, I don't know. Whatever it may be, like we have to actually have healthy relationships. Healthy relationships reflect a good God, good family, good friendships. These are things that we can all practically do in our lives to grow closer to God, love Him, and love others. All of these ways are structured, there's tons more than this. But let that just be like an initial brush stroke of like, hey, living for God, a structure to live for God doesn't just have to be like, I have to pray like this and I have to read like this. No, there's so many other ways that we can, like, a lot of people who do like art, who like paint, and that's their way of like communicating with God, or like lots of things. But the point is, what works for me? Why? The first thing is, why do I live for Jesus? What is my why? You have to know your own why in your own words. Maybe you listen to somebody else and that's kind of a good, it's like, oh, I'm going to use that. But the point is, you have to make it your own. Why do you live for Jesus? And that answer will change as the years go by. Hopefully, as you grow more and more in God, the answer will grow richer and deeper, right? Like my 5-year-old child and his answer, when he's 50, I hope it's different, right? I hope he's grown in those years. And I hope all of us grow too. But ask yourself why. And then once you know your why, you have to figure out, okay, how can I build my life intentionally? How can I trellis my life intentionally so that I don't just, like go through the motions and wake up one day and like, what do I do with my life? I didn't actually live for Jesus at all. But what can I do? What structure can I put in place that helps me to grow in God every single day, practically? Just one thing. And the last thing is, take it slow. Try it out. It's really trial and error. Like, if this works for you, maybe this doesn't work for you. Like, in our small group, like Cheongyangbu last year, we did QT and then we did the Bible in a year. And for some people, like, that switch was really good. For others, it was like, this is really hard. Everyone is wired differently, but it's good for us to try all those things out and know what works for me. How can I grow in God? Because it's a journey, not a destination. It's a journey. But without a destination, your journey is meaningless, right? And so let's have both in place. So let's throw up the questions on the board on the PowerPoint, because these are our questions that we're going to go through. And Cheongyangbu, I'm going to have you guys go through that with Simon today, as far as like going through each of those points. It's those 3 points. What's your why? What's your structure? And what's the one thing you can do to make that happen? Can I have the praise team come up? So these are all things that we can do in practical ways. What's my why? Why do I want to do this? You have an answer. Maybe it's I don't want to do this. I don't know what the answer is. But we all have an answer of some sort. We got to ask ourselves and figure that out. And maybe it's like, well, I did it at first because my parents pushed me to, or this person pushed me to. And you realize, that's not a good enough why, anymore. So your why changes. That's okay. That's good. That's all part of the process. But as you refine your why, then you have to, it's not just, oh yeah, I want to live for God and that's it. But you got to have a structure in place, a trellis, something that helps you to actually do that, to grow in God. And as we sing this song today, the song is Lord, I Need You. I really felt this song was just like, it just fit, because no matter what trellis you create in your life, what structure you make in your life, the point of it is that you want to say, I need you, God. Like, I'm doing this so I can grow closer to you. I'm not doing this to check off like a box or to look like the perfect Christian. Like, all of those things are very like surface, it's not going to get us very far. But why do I do these things? Why do I structure my life? Because I want to grow in God. I want to know him. I want to need him in my life every day. And that's why I do these things. Can we all stand? And as we sing this song, I hope that this is a song that you have in your heart all the time. Like, God, I'm here. My life without you is meaningless. My life without you has no purpose. So God, I need you. Every single hour, I need you. Help me to depend and live for you. Let's sing this song together.